across all sports for one low price. We kick things off with Hebrew Cheetah, who took home $19K in NBA. Also in NBA, C. Lion shipped $100K. In the PGA Streets, C. Jacobs 986 $100K, while Club Camp Cole and Birdie Monster each took home over $200K. The biggest winner of all was an NBA hit, with the man shipping a monster $1 million in DraftKings Millie Maker contest. Our members weren't the only ones crushing the leaderboard. Our very own JSU won over $100K in MLB, while BigT had another monster performance, shipping for $146K in PGA. With NBA playoffs, MLB, and PGA going strong, now is a great time to subscribe to Run Pure Sports. Head on over to our website and check out all of our affordable subscription options, and use code RPSHeaters25 for 25% off your first payment on a monthly subscription. And don't sleep on our free content offerings as well. PGA Millie winner Record 62 has been producing regular PGA articles on our website to help you build winning lineups. And subscribe to our YouTube channel today to sign up for alerts to our daily free live streams. Our best team has been on fire as well, with our guy Keg dominating the live NASCAR betting, pulling in over 22 units per race in 3 of the past 5 races. There's no better way to build your bankroll than betting with Keg and Coop on the live KegCast. Check it out today for just $40 a month. Thanks again, guys. Make sure you head on over to Run Pure Sports and find out why our members are crushing in every sport by accessing our free and premium content.
What is going on, everyone? AP over here at Run Pure Sports, bringing to you once again the Office Hour Show with Sabersim. I'm here with my guy Jordan. Jordan, what is going on, my man? How is your week going so far?
It's going good. I'm excited to be back. It's been a good start to baseball season so far this past week or so. I'm excited to talk a little bit more baseball here today on stream with you. But how's the start of the season been for you so far?
It's been a ton of fun. I'm still like really grinding the NBA streets, and that's like my main focus, but I digest all the content. I love using Sabersim. I've dabbled a little bit already and had some good success with MME. And I'm excited to dive in today because I know that's going to help me with my process, and having this tool is just going to help things. And so we're going to talk through that probably over the next few weeks. We're just going to hammer and hit home MLB, since that's the main focus right now. If you haven't yet, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. All right, Jordan, let's get into it. So let's start with step one. I mean, if you're not familiar with Sabersim and the product and our partnership with Sabersim, you're going to learn a lot about it on this stream and in future streams. And I believe we have screen share pulled up right now. But Jordan, just kick us off. Talk to us a little bit about the product in relation to baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to start here and focus on what makes Sabersim pretty unique. What are the advantages of using it here, especially for baseball? And we've got a couple things going on in baseball in particular. We've got these very unique distributions, particularly for hitters, that really don't look anything like a bell curve. Definitely not anything like what we've seen in basketball when we've pulled this up, where you've got, a guy like CJ Cron, who's projected here for 11.4 points, his mathematical average outcome. But that outcome's like somewhere over here, only happens 6% of the time. Most of his outcomes are scoring like 0 or just a couple points. And then this huge tail of big upside outcomes here, right? A very complicated kind of distribution. And really the point I want to make about this is that average projections for baseball are not very useful. When you build with Sabersim, we actually simulate these games play by play here. And that allows us to understand this full range of outcomes for every single player on this slate. When we actually build your lineups, and I'll talk about this more in a second here, we pull from these actual outcomes rather than just using the averages. Like a traditional optimizer, or even just trying to eyeball projections and hand build, you're really not going to ever get at the actual level of nuance here of what a hitter or even a pitcher's actual outcomes look like. But the second thing this lets us do, and I'm sure you guys can see this here, the correlations as well, right? Everybody, I think I would say it's pretty close to common knowledge here at this point that baseball is a high correlation sport. We typically want to stack up our teams for those big upside situations where a team goes off and scores 12 runs. But there's a lot of kind of general rules of thumb out there for trying to handle correlation that are a little hit or miss or a little hard to know how to apply correctly. We know we want nice big stacks, maybe 5-3 stacks on DraftKings, for example, but how does that change on a smaller slate? How does that change in a different sized contest? What do you want that actual stack to be, right? Do we want the 1 through 5 hitters? Are we okay branching out to these other hitters, things like that? Because we have these game sims, we know exactly how correlated every player is in the order to every other player in the order. So all of this ultimately, and we'll see how this kind of comes together here in just a moment, all of this means that when you build with Sabersim, we're going to take advantage of this powerful data from the sims and build good lineups that make sense for the slate and the contest you're playing without having to really set any rules at all. And it unlocks you to spend your time on a lot more interesting things like the way your overall strategy you want to take on the slate, where maybe how much you want to adjust your exposures in step 3, which we can talk about in a little bit here, and all those other things. But I think it's kind of it's a little bit of an adjustment if you're used to some other tools and your baseball process was maybe, I go in and I set my stacking rules for all the teams and I go in and I pick all the guys I want to use as one-offs and I have to set my ownership caps and all these rules. You really don't have to do a lot of that here with Sabersim for baseball. We automate a lot of that tedious work for you. So any questions right off the bat there before we kind of jump into the actual process? I just wanted to start with just kind of an overview of what's going on here behind the scenes.
No, I mean, a few questions there. I love that you hit on the correlation factor. That's something that popped out right there. Yeah. And I was just going to highlight that, one thing in baseball that's going to be different than NBA is you have a positive correlation there. Which emphasizes the stacking. I think this is going to be a question more so for when we get into the different steps. But in step 2, I'm curious to how the sliders are impacted by that correlation number, or if they are at all. So if you pull that up, if you put that, I guess one thing I've noticed when using the default modes, because that's what I've been doing, just dabbling in MLB. I always do at the start because I'm still heavy with NBA, but I noticed that the correlation is always very high. Is there any scenario where that correlation slider is lower? And then the second question is, how is that slider impacted by the actual correlation number that we saw in that other screen that you were showing?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that the correlation slider is going to be most heavily impacted by the size of the slate. It moves, so you can see on this particular 6-game main slate we have here tonight, it's moving a little bit between 7 and 8 here for different contests. But the big thing that will change this for baseball is slate size. So for example, if you come down to like a 2-game slate, or if there's a 2-game night slate or something you're playing, you'll see this correlation slider actually come down a little bit lower to some of these lower values here. And that's just because with less players overall in the pool, in the player pool, it's going to be more likely that to win those big GPPs, people are probably going to need the nuts. They're going to need the stone optimal. We don't necessarily need to, you may still get stacks. You may still get a lot of stacks, but we don't need to rely on the correlation factor as much because we're really kind of just shooting for upside with that small of a player pool. But for most of your traditional main slates, you're going to see that correlation slider here by default show up at that 7 or 8 range. I should mention here while we're talking about the sliders here, that these are our back-tested values. The way we actually go about doing this is we'll take historical contests that ran that are actually in the DraftKings history here. And we will build thousands of lineups at every single combination of sliders. It's a pretty long process. I think it actually takes like 24 hours to run on our servers here. And what we find are the best produced lineups, the highest actual value lineups that could be produced for those contests, those become the default. So these are not just kind of eyeball tested. These are not just our intuitive, best guess of where they are. There's some data-driven back testing going on here. So, and then your other question here about how the correlation values are actually used here. So the way this actually ends up working is when we build the lineups, we build them player by player. So we'll have first player goes into the lineup. Every single other player that's still remaining in the pool that could be used as the next player into the lineup, they get their projection on the builder side. The projection gets adjusted based on how well they correlate already. So, if the first player to go into the lineup is CJ Cron, for example, right? The next player that's kind of maybe a little bit more likely to go in, maybe now is Chris Bryant, right? The builder kind of wants to use another Rocky a little bit more for that lineup because he's correlated to the first guy in. And then we do that player by player and continue to build out the rest of the lineup here. So.
Oh, I like that a lot. Let's start with step one. So yeah, and I think this will help people because like right now, my main focus is still NBA, like I've said a couple times now. And I'm honestly just like, we got our MLB team. I'm digesting the information, listening to guys like Draft Cheat. He's been phenomenal with pitchers. Listen to Gary in the stacking breakdown, and all of our guys, Uncle T, Stevie Boyton, the whole team over there. And what I'm honestly doing is throughout the day, I'm making notes, and so this first part where you can see the teams right there, Toronto against New York. Mm-hmm. I'm literally like, if I agree with some of the content that's out there, and let's just say I want to stack Toronto, which would have been awesome yesterday. Well, at least, to get Vlad, I'm pumping that up. I'm being very aggressive with it. In the case where, a few days ago, I stacked the Braves heavily. I moved the team total all the way up to like 8.9. It was kind of ridiculous, but they ended up going off for 13. Would you say that's like too far? So I'm going through and all the stacks I want, instead of going through each individual player like I do with NBA, I'm just like, man, if I like the Angels, I'm pumping it way up. If I don't like a team, like maybe I'm off the Royals today, I'm moving that team total way, way down. Is that like a simple way for someone like someone who's new to MLB DFS to start their process?
I think that's a really good approach. I think listening to the overall content that's going on in the shows throughout the day and making adjustments to these team totals is a really good way to add a little bit of additional value here. I would be a little careful going up like super high or super low on these. Basically what we do when we actually go ahead and do this is if you adjust Toronto, so I adjusted Toronto by a full run up here from where we had them projected. What we'll do on the back end is we kind of trim out the bottom range of outcomes for them in terms of the really low scoring total games until their average scoring output in our sims is 5.4 runs. And then we'll adjust the Sabersim projections here until they match that outcome. But since we're using the sims, if you go and bump Toronto's team total projection to like 10 runs, there's not a lot of sims where their average outcome is actually 10 runs. So you kind of get a weird sample size issue there. I will say in general, if you just bump a team, if you want to make a fairly big impact, bumping a team up by a full run generally should have a pretty big impact. I would start there, and you can always make more adjustments in step 3.
One thing real quick, I think you have to have the the source be Sabersim.
I was just gonna say that too.
And so what I love right there is look what it's done to the projections, and now you can compare them. So yeah, you moved it up a run, but you can now compare it to the original one, like on Springer right there. And what? So yeah, I think maybe when I bumped it way up by like 3 or 4 runs, that probably was a little bit too aggressive. But like right, wrong, or different, I'm still dialing in my process too. And I got lucky that day, and the Braves went off, and so it is what it is. But that is something that I really, really enjoy using. Now, what about the downside? Would you just move, like if you don't like a team, would you be very aggressive on the downside? Like you want minimal exposure to them?
Yeah. If you're low on a team overall, I'd recommend sitting in between. I like to make my adjustments to the team totals about a half run to a full run in one direction. So already, if you drop a team by a half run, you're going to start getting an impact out of that. If you take it further, I think we had them at 4-3 to begin with. Maybe we take KC just as an example. I think that's the one you popped out. It's going to make quite a bit of a big impact. The best way ultimately to use Sabersim in general, and this is true for all sports, is to take advantage of the many different tools at your disposal here. So one tool, editing team totals in step one, it's going to help you along the path of kind of getting the right kind of lineups that you want. But you can combine that with adjusting your exposure to these teams on step three and make sure that you finally get everything dialed in here exactly the way you want. Part of the reason, I'll just mention this here, I love editing these team totals is because it gives you correlated, it makes correlated changes on your player pool overall. So let's look, like we bumped KC down by a full run, right? What impact does that have on your lineups? Well, it actually ended up bumping Casey Mize here by, almost 4 points. And that's kind of exactly what you would almost hope it to do. If you were bearish on the Royals hitting offense, right? You didn't want to play Royal stacks, you're really making kind of a statement that you're probably bullish on the Detroit pitcher. And it will help you make these correlated decisions about how you want to approach the game as a whole here in a sport where the projections of one player affect the other so dramatically. So I really do like using these. And I think, as you mentioned, just listening to the Run Pure shows, seeing what the guys are saying and making adjustments to these throughout the day, I think it's a great way to add some value here. So.
Oh, I like that. That's a good point too on the pitching, because then one of the other things I do is just shout out to the crew, but specifically Draft Cheat, his pitching comments and everything has just been on point. And so what I'll do is take in all that information, but I'll really dial in. So like where I make my stance more so right now is on pitching, and I'll have a pitcher pool of say 4 or 5 guys, and then I'll just X out everyone else. But then when it comes to like the teams, I haven't really X'd out too many spots unless there's a really big weather issue. Then I'm just going to X it out completely. If I don't like it, I just bump it down. That way I'm not like you said on the back end, maybe there's a sneaky, a 2-man stack in there that gets in there that the Sims behind the scene are seeing versus what I'm seeing. And so I don't want to eliminate that from my possible outcomes there. And then also I know we'll probably run a build here soon and we'll talk about step 3. I can fine tune it further in step 3. So I think your comments there are really on point. Get in here, adjust the teams that you like and use that as a base point when you're getting started. And then as we go through the steps, you're going to see how you can fine tune that to get it, to get your exposures where you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the one other thing I wanted to mention here too, I think a lot of people used to other tools kind of feel like they do have to do a bunch of player pool curation for baseball in particular. One thing, if you've ever used a traditional optimizer to build like MME lineups, you'll see these guys, right? So I'm sorting by value here. That's the average projection divided by the salary. And you'll see these guys, right? 8-hole hitter, Espinal here, 4th best value hitter on the slate. Traditional optimizers love this guys, right? Garrett Hampson, another one, 6th, 7th best overall value on the slate, 9-hole hitter for the Rockies. It's just because their average projection is really good compared to their salary. And it's hard to get a traditional optimizer to get away from these guys because it's like, oh, I can get 7.22 points for 2,800. When you build with Sabersim, if you're getting Hampson in your lineups, and you probably get a little bit of him in your lineups anyway, we're actually pulling from the Sims to build those individual lineups. So if you're getting him, it's not because he's projected for 2.68, whatever it was, fantasy points on average per dollar. It's because you kind of rolled a set of simulations where he scored 20, 25 points. And that's exactly what you want. Or the Rocky stack overall went off or something like that. So I think doing a little bit of player pool curation on your pitchers, I think that's a great way to do it. Get those guys, get your pitching pool dialed in the way that you want it to go. You know me, we've talked here now on a few of these streams. I end up always having a really wide pool. I play pretty diverse, but I think doing a pitching pool is a great idea on your hitters. apart from exactly as you said, crossing off those games with bad weather, I don't think you need to mess around with this too much, because the builder is going to give you those guys that are good plays for their expectations. So.
Yeah, no, very good breakdown. Let's dive in. Let's kind of put together, not necessarily like a build, but just like to help you, with your research process. And then I think when we get to that step 3, we can really show people how to dial in their exposures. So do you want to just, let's just say we're doing a 150 max, go through the pool size, 1,500 and why we're marketing it at that. And then the last thing I want you to on too, Jordan, is the min and max salary ranges. Are you messing with that at all?
Yeah, cool. So we'll talk about step 2 here a little bit. Again, the most important thing to do here, something I just don't feel like it's talked about enough in DFS is the context of your contest. It's very important in terms of your strategy. So we'll do this for a 150 max build. I think that's a great idea here, but always very important to come in and tell us what contest you're playing. And you'll see there's pretty big difference here. You're playing a 500 man single entry. We're going to have you approach that with a different strategy than if you're playing the big flagship GPP 50,000 entrants or something like that, right? So tell us what contest you're playing. We'll set these sliders here where we think they're appropriate for the contest. Let's talk about a little bit about this. Min and max salary. I don't really touch max salary for baseball, especially for main slates. I'm totally fine building all the way to the max. I will bring this down to maybe about 45,000 salary here. You don't get very many lineups that low anyway, but I think it's perfectly viable, especially to beat a large field GPP, to have that 2 cheap stacks, maybe 2 kind of cheaper pitchers. You end up at that, maybe even the 47,000 range on occasion. I don't hate that. I don't want to restrict the builder too much. So a lot of times I'll drop that down here. And you had mentioned pool size. I do also like to upgrade pool size when I'm doing a 150 max build to 1,500. This is basically going to ultimately what this does is this is saying for every lineup of our 150 that we want to build, we're going to have basically 10 shots at it in our pool. It's going to allow us to change our exposures, dynamically edit our exposures in step 3, but it also makes sure that you have the best lineups possible. Every lineup basically can be thought of as being the best one out of 10 we were picking from. So we'll let this build here for a second. It'll go through, analyze the sims, build up our big pool of 1,500 lineups, and then we'll talk a little bit about step 3 here. I just wanted to get that build started, but AP, any questions for me on the build setting screen or anything that you do in there in particular?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for my first few runs, I left it right around 48,000. I think with baseball, you can leave. It's so much more about stacking and having correlated lineups. The only time I think I might adjust it upwards is if I'm locked in on 2 stud pitchers or 2 where it's my lowest price pitcher is going to be in the 9K range, which isn't going to happen right now. But there are some slates where you get 2 studs, and I might bump that up. But honestly, I think you maybe get a little bit of an edge there because you're going to see some of these lineups where you're leaving 1,200, 1,300 on the table, and they're still good builds, and they're what you want in tournaments. You don't want those chalky. You could go up to a higher price, hitter that's going to be chalk on that slate, and it's baseball. The guy could go 0 for 4, 0 for 5, or whatever, and get you a 0. It happens all the time. You want to be different, and it's the easiest sport, in my opinion, to be different on. And that's why I take my stands when it comes to pitching. I plant my flags there. Hitting, I go with the stacks I like, but this season I'm just going to let the Sabersim technology there kind of do its thing. So there we go. Right off the bat, there's almost 5K left on the table with that top build right there that I'm seeing. But walk us through this screen. We're in step 3 now, Jordan. This is where I think there's a lot of fun things you can do, looking at the stacks, the teams, your exposures there, and then obviously adjusting min and max and then going through your lineups. But kind of take us through the screen here in step 3.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I just want to point out here, and if you were watching what we did just before, right, you might ask, especially if you used other tools before, hey, well, where's the stacking rule, right? The one thing I didn't do this whole time here is set a stacking rule. You come over here to the stacks tab here, and you can see it. 150 lineups, mostly 5 3s, then 5 2s, then 4 4s, then 4 3s. Then we have a couple different other stacking types here that have kind of trickled in, but we didn't have to set a single stacking rule. And I think that's just like one of the coolest things here is, you may say like, again, well, it's not that hard for me to set my 5-3 rule and move on. But in reality, that's not really totally optimal. That's actually not really the best way to stack. We want some of these other alternative stacking type rules in here. It changes based on the contest. It changes based on the slate size. And I just think it's very freeing to know that you can play baseball DFS without having to figure out exactly what the rules of how your stacks are going to come together looks like in your lineups. So we got nice big stacks here, as we mentioned. The most important thing I think that you can do in step 3 is fine tuning, quality control your lineups to make sure they look the way you want. And that's why we built this big pool of 1,500 lineups. So you come in here, maybe we'll start with the stacks. Maybe you come in here and you say, okay, I get it. I get the correlation slider. I'm on board, but I'm not playing a 3-2-2 stack in a large field GPP. I get it. No problem. Come over here, hit max exposure, hit that to 0. And what we'll do is we'll go through, and that was just one lineup that this is going to eliminate, but it'll go through the pool of 1,500, find the best 150 where now you have no 3-2-2 stacks. And you can do that on the stack level. You can do that on the individual player level. You can do that on the team stacks level. So, I mean, right off the bat, something that jumped out to me here, we bumped up Toronto a lot in step 1. So probably a good thing that we're getting 61% Toronto stacks, but maybe that feels a little high. Maybe that's a little bit higher than we wanted to come in at. We can bring that down to 50% here. And we'll do the same thing, right? We're going to sort through the pool of 1,500, find the best 150 where no more than half of your lineups have a Toronto stack in them. And you can get really granular here in baseball. You can break this down by the overall size of the stack if you want to. You can also handle this on the player level. So if you want to do this on the pitching side, right? It looks like we gave, let's see, who's popping for our pitchers here. Let me open this up. Actually, I'm going to make my screen a little bit smaller here. Hopefully we can still see that just so I can see my max exposures here. But, maybe so Gossman got a little bit of a boost here as a result of us boosting that Toronto stack as well. That mostly comes from the win bonus and the scoring, but maybe we were really high on the Toronto stack. We weren't so high on Gossman, right? We didn't want to be overall that high, and we can bump this back down to 25% exposure. And the same thing's going to happen there. So this is really what I meant about using every step of the process. We made some adjustments in step 1. We were watching the Run Pure streams. We made some adjustments. We come in here. We're like, holy crap, that's a lot of Toronto. I still want to be heavy on them, but I'm going to quality control my lineups and get them fine-tuned the way I want here in step 3. Just really, really simplifies the process. Lets you spend time just making these adjustments on the fly instead of having to go back to step 1 and so on. So.
No, that's really important. One quick thing I was just thinking about.
Yeah.
So how often is Saber behind the scenes updating to lineups coming out? And how often should you be updating the projections as a user? Yeah,
really, really good question. So one thing that's really nice about baseball, especially after NBA, is that the lineups do come out quite a bit earlier. We'll have lineups probably, I guess the early slate probably just got started or it's getting started soon, but for the main slate, we'll probably have some lineups coming out soon. We typically resim the games here fairly quickly when lineups come out. I would say within just a couple minutes, we'll typically update it, resim the game. And a lot of times once a game is simmed, once the final lineup is out, we'll put a green check mark next to the team. So you'll see kind of a green check mark here. They'll get a confirmed status over here. And that's basically it for that team. It's done. The projections won't change from there. One thing, I guess, so before I move on, once every team has their confirmed flag, you're probably kind of just good to build. You might, sometimes with these late West Coast games, they may not get their confirmed lineup out before lock, but generally pretty good. The one thing to note and one definitely be careful of here is if you've gone in and updated these custom projections here, you've made some changes, we won't ever overwrite that. So if we made an adjustment to Toronto and bumped up and we said we want to be big on the Blue Jay stacks, but then they come out with a lineup later and we resim this game, your projections for Toronto are still just going to be the same custom projections they were at the time you made this change. So I do think it's probably worth maybe throughout the day, if you're watching the streams, take some notes on the guys that you want to be kind of heavier on, maybe not as heavy on, but before you go in and spend all the time to make all your final adjustments, let some of those lineups come out so that you're making the adjustment on the team that's actually playing ball that night. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And we have a few questions that we can get to real quick.
Let's do it.
This first one, do you guys eliminate the bottom of the order from stacks? I think you kind of hit on this in that first part when you're showing the individual player and the range of outcomes, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I don't personally. I think there's kind of a couple things here going on. Let's look at the Toronto stack overall and just do kind of a little bit of a deeper dive. So the main reasons why I don't really end up eliminating the bottom of the order guys on the stack. So the first is that they still have upside. If we look at these 95th, 99th percentile outcomes, these are the ones we're shooting for in GPPs. They're not the best hitters on the team. Sometimes they have a little bit, maybe one less plate appearance per game, but they still have the upside to have those big scoring outcomes. We can look at this on the distribution side as well and see, they still have these higher scoring outcomes. And I guess to be more precise about it is that you'll only get them in your lineups at the appropriate rate at which they have those outcomes, right? You're not going to get the just really cheap, high projected hitter on average showing up in your lineups unless he has the upside to back it up. So I don't really do a lot of eliminating those lower order guys in my stacks. I also don't do a lot of intentionally trying to stack the order in a certain way. Again, we can pick up, let's look at Vlad here for a second, and we can see, he's
the only time I would eliminate a guy is if you know he's just gonna get pinch hit, and he's just gonna have one at bat. I mean, otherwise, definitely don't eliminate it. Just let if you're running 1 through 5 stacks all the time, you're not gonna be different from anyone else. Sure, it feels the best, but it's not gonna be what wins you a tournament. I mean, it could. But you're going to be battling a lot of the public out there because people love to run a 1 through 5 stack. So I definitely wouldn't eliminate the bottom half of the order at all.
Yeah, I should mention here real quickly too. Let me go ahead and pull this build setting back up just in case. I want to reiterate, I don't think this is a necessary part of the process at all, but you can create stacking rules if you want to. So if you did want to come in here and say, look, I hear what you guys are saying, but I'm just getting started with Sabersim and I want to make my stacks the way I want them. You can come in here and say, give me a 5 stack in every lineup and control the batting order spots here if you wanted to, and say, no 8 or 9 or no 7, 8 or 9. Again, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's going to kill you if you do it. But we do have those stacking rules here for people that want a little bit of additional control. So
one other question, just because it came to my mind, and then I'll get to some of these other ones. Talk to us about is park factor factored in? Is weather factor in? Talk to us about those other kind of macro things that can have a huge impact on baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take both of those into account. So very unique to baseball, but very important is both the park factors and the weather of the game. So I believe this is opening weekend for my local park, Coors here. You can kind of see it right off the bat, right? Look how high these team totals are, right? High elevation, also a very wide outfield at Coors. It lends itself well to just balls that might get caught elsewhere are getting down in Coors. Look at the team totals here, right? Some of our biggest totals on the slate, they'll be the highest Vegas totals as well. We are taking into account the park factors there as well. Weather is another big factor, right? These hot, wind blowing out, dry days that we'll get to kind of in the summer here a little bit more. It really helps that ball sail. Certain parks will promote weather a little bit more. A common example is the Wrigley Field wind blowing out game. Will have a very high total. The wind blowing in straight in from center at Wrigley, you'll have a very low total. That is taken all into account in our simulations here, and very important for baseball. The one thing that is not taken into account, this is definitely something if you're going to be playing baseball, you got to focus on, is the risk of postponement from the weather. So we do assume that all games are going to play. We will, if a game is going to be kind of rainy and wet and cold, we will account for that in the sims in the way that affects the scoring environment and how the teams are projected, but we don't we don't at the moment ever assume that a game's going to get postponed. We're looking at some creative ways to kind of start accounting for that in the simulations themselves. But very good use of your time. Research the games. Keep an eye on what games have weather concerns. And personally, for me, with how wide ranges of outcomes are in baseball anyway, if a game looks like it's going to be rainy, if it looks like it could get rained out, a lot of times I just fade it. There's almost always better plays to go to. So,
another thing to keep in mind though, too, is I do think that there's a lot of different weather resources out there. And I'm not going to talk specifically about any of them or any of them. Mm-hmm. I think all those weather guys have a very difficult job. But I think it drives ownership too. So I think if like, let's just say someone out there is using like a color grade or whatever, and they're grading a game, very risky, it's going to move ownership off that game. And they want to get these games in. And so I be in Discord, look at these different resources, but understand how these resources too are impacting ownership. I think is huge. Just one interesting tidbit there, but that is good to know that the postponement of games obviously isn't impacted in, and that makes a ton of sense. That has to be kind of more of a manual type thing where you X out a game, or can you late swap too with MLB?
Yeah, you can. So let's actually, and I want to show, specifically a very cool feature with late swap. Well, it's not unique to baseball, but I think the best use case for it is baseball. So we'll go ahead. I think I've got some entries here for tonight's slate loaded. So we'll go ahead and get these in. And there's a little toggle down here. So this is the entry editor for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. Very easy way. If you just watch me do it here, it took me 2 clicks to download my entries file, load it in, and fill it with the lineups that we just built. So my lineups are in. I'm good to go. If it came time to, actually, let me do this first. We'll download it, and then I'd upload it. So now it's late swap time, right? Maybe we get maybe that West Coast game, the Reds and Dodgers, we get a different lineup than expected. One of my favorite features for the late swap for baseball in particular is this little toggle down here. Only swap lineups containing out players, right? If almost the entire slate is over and all the games have started except for this Dodgers game, and then the Dodgers have a different catcher than expected, right? We want to swap for that. We don't want a guy with a 0 in our lineups, but we don't necessarily need to rebuild every single lineup in our pool just to make sure we have the right Dodgers catcher. You can turn this on. And then in this case, it's going to say late swap 0 lineups because none of the guys in these lineups are out. But this will auto adjust. So if there were 9 lineups in my pool that had a guy playing that were out, it'll only late swap those 9. I don't like to use this in basketball for obvious reasons, right? When there's big news, when there's breaking news, you typically want to late swap everything and take advantage of that. But for baseball, where it's not as much of a concern, I love using this. And it very much simplifies things for you. When you just have those weird, a lot of times it's those West Coast teams, right? Surprise guy is out of the lineup and you just need to update real quick. So
one more question too, that I think is a good one. If I upload my own projections into Sabersim, do the simulations run off the newly updated projections, or is it a set of simulations that changes on the data inputted?
Yeah, good question. So I'll show you here. So, and this really applies to basically every kind of custom projection you can make. But let's say you upload a custom projection and that takes Ohtani's projection from 18.13 to 20.13. So we're boosting him up by 2 points. What we actually do is in the simulations, we'll take every single outcome, every single sim we have for Ohtani, and bump up his production in that sim by the same difference that you did at the average projection. So in this case, we bumped his projection up by 2 points at the average projection. Every outcome is going to be increased by 2. So when he scores -4, now it's -2. And when he scores 40, now it's 42. But we still take advantage of the full distributions. We still pull in the diverse range of outcomes as you're actually going and building your lineups. Another way of kind of thinking about this is if you imagine this entire distribution, this is Ohtani's full range of outcomes. It is as if we shifted it all 2 points to the right. That's kind of the other way to think about it. But you still get to take advantage of those sims, the distributions there, all of that stuff. So.
Yeah, and I kind of, the term I use is adding some personal bias to it, which is important, I think. Which I think is just, I like the team totals there, and I think it's a easy way to make some quick adjustments, so I can still focus NBA, but still play MLB at a very high level. So I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to do that tonight. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm probably going to bump down. Well, actually, I haven't looked at anything yet. I don't even know who's pitching in Coors, but I always like to be a little under on Coors because it just always gets so much ownership to where it's baseball. Like anything can happen with these hitters. And so, we'll definitely see. I'll have to see what the content looks like. Let me see if there's any other questions. I think we hit all the questions in YouTube.
It's Freeland and Steele in Coors Field here. So I think we'll probably have some pretty chalky hitting stacks here tonight for this Coors Field game, but.
All right. Yeah, you're probably right there. Yeah. Especially if I haven't looked at the weather elsewhere. But I mean, I know here it's been windy lately, but actually I think it's supposed to be warming up. I know here locally. So I'm in the Midwest, but all huge things to consider when doing this. And I think it's just, if you like Coors, like, I don't know, like, what would you move that game to? Like set, like a little over 7 and a little over 6. I mean, that's going to have a big impact here on the slate if you do that.
Yeah, strategically, I also always pretty much end up a little bit under on the Coors games too. We'll see how it ends up working out tonight here. If you want it to be over on the Coors games, I just recommend with all of your team total adjustments, I really like to get started with a half run. And you can always come back and make more adjustments here, but you get started with like approximately a half run, see what the impact of that is on your lineups. I mean, you saw it before. We bumped Toronto by a full run before, and we're getting like 60% Toronto bats in 150. It's a pretty big impact. So I like to start with that half run a build, see what it looks like. You can always come back, bump it up a little bit more. You can bump up your exposure in step 3 too. I would kind of bookend things with that full 1 run adjustment. I probably, for me, wouldn't go higher than that, just because you start to limit the simulations that are available to set those projections at that point. But we just saw it before. It leaves a big impact even on just a single run adjustment. I did want to just note, since we had mentioned it before here, this is what that green check mark looks like as well. So it looks like KC during this stream put a lineup out here for tonight. So this team is now confirmed.
If you click on that, is it going to pull up? Because I did notice that. So when you get the green check mark, and if you pull that team up, okay, so they're all in there, and you could reset. So right now we put the team total down, but maybe something changes, and now maybe you like them and you want to bump it up half a run. You could do that, and what you're going to see there is, the projections update. And that's kind of what I love there, because it automatically does it. I mean, Jordan, me and you have done this now a few times, and with NBA, I like to adjust the projections on an individual player level. That's because I'm watching all of these games and I know it very well. It's tougher for me with MLB. So I like to just take a bigger picture type of view and make these changes on that level instead of at the individual hitter level. And so, okay, so 4-6. So let's just say I liked KC. What if you bump them up half a run? So 5.1. I want to see what that does to the projections, apply changes there.
Let's take a look here.
Anyone that knows me knows that I'm never bumping KC down.
Yeah. So
that's my I don't really have a team in baseball, but everyone gives me crap all the time because I'm our local Royals homer for sure.
Yeah, they always seem a little under-owned to me. It's a stack that I find myself getting on pretty often as well.
What are they doing with Bobby Witt's price? They're just keeping him like free this whole time.
He will probably. They did the same thing with Wander last year. I think he was like stone minimum for the Rays for like 2 weeks straight. Got up to like 30% owned by the end of that. But yeah, I mean, they bumped the projections up here, by less than a point for each of these guys, but it gives them a little boost. It does have some value. And again, you can always run the build, see the impact of that, and go from there, and continue to bump it up. So definitely no issues there.
Yeah, I like that. That's awesome. Anything else that you want to cover? I know we're going to continue to cover this, and there's a lot of different things to go through, but anything else that you want to hit on today, Jordan, regarding Sabersim, the process, all the way up to lock, using this tool.
I don't think so. I think that was a pretty thorough one here today. I think that was really useful. Again, I would say, if you're just getting started out, where to focus your time. I think making some adjustments to these team totals in step one, based on your own research or based on what the Run Pure guys are saying on the shows. I think that's a great way to do it. I think when you get to step two, don't worry too much about making a bunch of changes. Really just let us know what contest you're playing, build yourself a nice big pool of lineups, and then fine tune those things in step three, adjust your exposures, get everything where you want them to be. The people that have the best results with Sabersim and the most success with using our tools are kind of taking advantage of what's available to them in step one and what's available in step three, and really using those two things together. That's the easiest way to do it. So I'm already getting excited about the slate here now tonight. I'm excited to dive in, look at this a little bit closer and see what happens.
Yeah, I am as well. If you haven't yet, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, the red button right there in the right-hand corner. It helps us out a ton. Head on over to Run Pure Sports, sign up, and join. You use the joint package there. It's monthly, weekly, over there, right on our homepage, runpuresports.com. Sign up, test it out. I mean, let's just say you're not used to using an optimizer and you don't want to, fork out, a ton of money. Go sign up for the weekly, test it out for a week. If it's not for you, it's not for you. You can cancel, and no big deal there. But I do think it's going to end up being a staple in your baseball process. I know it is for me, for sure, just because getting that proper correlation there for baseball is just so important in my opinion. So any final thoughts, Jordan?
No, that's all I've got. Final thought, right. It looks like Patrick Cantlay is having a pretty good first round here, and I've got a ton of exposure to him. So excited.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, people like to, I love Discord. Everyone calls them can't play.
Yeah.
Can't play or can't dress. No, I have a little bit of Patrick Cantlay too, so I see he's doing good. And Corey Connors, what a hero Corey Connors is. So golf is like NBA is like my favorite sport. Golf is probably my next. Baseball should be, because I've had my best success with baseball, but out of all the sports, and I follow them all, so it is what it is. But I would say out of all of them, I'm not like your diehards where I'm in there like watching every game, seeing every at bat and all that stuff. It's hard. It's definitely hard. But golf is up there, and Corey Connors is. I mean, hopefully you have a piece of him. He had an ace today, just having a phenomenal round, and yeah, a ton of fun. But Jordan, this has been awesome. Good time. We'll be doing this again next week. Give us ideas for the show too. Send me questions in Discord. Anything that's on your mind that comes up throughout the week, send me a DM. Give me your question so that I can put it on the list and so that we can make sure it gets answered in this office hour show. We'll continue to go through this. Once I have my process dialed in, I can do a stream where I'm kind of going through my process start to finish, so you can see what it looks like. I did that for NBA, and I thought we had a ton of success with that. So I'm AP. That's Jordan. Simon, get us out of here.